perfect. Okay, so welcome everyone. If this is your first time on one of our webinars, just some quick housekeeping stuff. Everyone is on mute automatically as you join the webinar, and but at the same time though, I would really love to hear from you. So if you can click on the chat function and just briefly kind of talk about which institution you're from and your role at institutions, so I can get a sense of where people are from, that would be amazing. And throughout the workshop, if you have any questions, discussions, comments, whatever you want to raise, please feel free to use that same chat function. All right. The slides from the webinar are actually already up on our site, and I will go into that in just a little bit. It's like a special slide deck for facilitators and trainers. And the recording of the workshop is also going to go up, and I will let you know how you can access that in a little bit. So, because I'm the only one, usually I'm the one facilitating these webinars, but this time I'm speaking as well, so I'm going to go back and forth between looking at the chat and speaking as well. There'll be designated spots during the workshop where we're going to pause for questions as well. Just look at the chat. Wow, we have people from all over. Welcome, welcome. Okay. All right, so before we get started, I have a couple of polling questions that I'd like to run with you, just for me to get a sense of kind of your familiarity with some of the more feet on the ground content, as well as kind of familiarity with other kinds of mental health literacy training. So I'm just gonna pull up those polls right now. Okay, so here is the first poll. So have you read the contents of the More Feet on the Ground site, or have you taken e-learning modules from the site? A couple of seconds. Okay, it looks like most people have engaged with the content in some way. Okay, perfect, thank you. All right, and share the results. I hope you guys can see this. So it looks like most of you have experienced the content. Now I'm gonna, whoops. Second polling question is, have you previously taken other types of mental health literacy training? And you can check all that apply. Oh, I see a question in the chat to see about whether you'll receive a certificate for the training. No, you will not. It's a kind of a voluntary training, so we don't really have a certificate program for this. Oh, and another thing that I should clarify. So this workshop is not training for More Feet on the Ground, as in I'm not training you about the contents, I'm training you to deliver the contents. So you would become a trainer or a person who is able to then facilitate these workshops and guide other people on your campus through this through the contents of More Feet on the Ground. Does anyone have any questions on that? I'm not sure if I'm explaining myself correctly. Okay, I'm gonna end the polling on that. Looks like a lot of people have done Safe Talk, mental health first aid, and other kinds of training. I'd be curious to see what kinds of training those are, if you want to put that in the chat as well. So with that then, I'm actually, since some of you have never seen the More Feet on the Ground site, I'm going to briefly pull up the site so you can take a quick look at that. Oh yeah, Assist is really popular. Thanks for putting that into the chat. Give me 2 quick seconds while I share the website again. Zoom is so finicky. Oops. Here, okay. So hopefully what you can now see on my screen is the More Feet on the Ground website. So it's just very simple, morphingontheground.ca. And for those of you who are not familiar with the content or have never taken any of the e-learning courses before, I really recommend that, after this workshop is over, please take a look at it, because you're not going to be able to deliver the content if you're not as familiar with the content. There's a couple of different ways you can engage with the content here. One is that you can go through the e-learning course. You pick the course and just go through each one of the recognize, respond, refer, reflect concepts I'm going to be talking about in the workshop here today. You do have to log in to take the course or register to take the course, but that really is just using your campus email, so that we do keep we do keep a record of how many people from each campus have taken this course, and that when campuses, because a lot of them use them for onboarding training for their staff and such, so that we can provide that information back to campuses to say that you have X amount of people who have taken this training. And happy to answer any questions about that later on as well. The other way that you can kind of take a look at the content is just by clicking through some of the other things that we have here. We go into kind of different types of mental health concerns that people might be experiencing. By no means, though, do we want this to be any kind of self-diagnosis, diagnosing other people, but it just provides some background information and basic foundational understanding for the kind of common types of mental health challenges that people might see. What's also interesting here in our video library, and this is something that will be helpful if you're going to be delivering this content and kind of rejigging the content to match your audience, is that we have a number of different videos from actual faculty members from institutions, or kind of student advisors, resident staff, on their experiences having taken the training, and also their thoughts about the various concepts that we are going to dive into. Particularly here, I would say is really good is the kind of some of the faculty videos when they talk about their own personal experiences addressing mental health and mental health challenges with their students. Okay, so back to the training. I'm going to stop my screen again. And yes, these slides will be made available post-session. In fact, sorry, I'm going to share my screen again to tell you where you can get the slides. Okay. So after the end of this workshop, you're going to go to the More Feet on the Ground CA site, and you'll scroll right to the bottom where it says Facilitator's Guide. Okay. And here you can download the presentation slides, and these are not just the kind of the normal slides that you'll be delivering, but it also contains a facilitator's guide. So if you look at the notes under each slide, on each slide, it tells you about, here is where we like to talk about XYZ, and some tips, some advice for going through some of that training. You'll also find a couple of other worksheets and resources and handouts that we include in the training. Okay, so I'm going to stop that share and go back to my slide deck. Give me 2 quick seconds. Okay, wonderful. So I've already introduced you to the website. So I'm going to move on. I just want to do a quick shout out today to the University of Ottawa, because we've worked with them and adapted quite a little bit of their content, because they have some really interesting ways of delivering this on their campus. Some of the handouts were taken directly from some of their sessions. So brief shout out to our folks at University of Ottawa. So now, before we dive into the train the trainer training, that's a lot of trains in one sentence. Do I have any questions about the workshop? Let's quickly check the chat, see if people. Okay, awesome. So then we're just going to dive straight into it. So the basic idea behind the More Feet on the Ground training is that there are 4 objectives that you want to teach to your campus staff, which is recognize, respond, refer, and reflect. And that constitutes kind of your basic gatekeeper training that we want to the ideal is that we want most, if not all, staff, student leaders, faculty, etc., on campus to be able to serve as a point of contact to be able to direct students to appropriate resources on campus. And so by no means are we asking anyone who is not a clinician to suddenly become a counselor, to need to be able to do some of that work, but really it's just an idea that we're going to help channel students towards and connect them towards the help that they need. So there are, again, there are those 4 parts, and this is how we can ensure that students don't fall through the cracks, because if we're only designating the point of contact as being the counseling department, oftentimes that is not something that students are going to be familiar with. Their first point of contact is usually maybe a TA, it might be cafeteria staff, and these are the people that students usually come into contact with. So you want these people to then be trained to be able to recognize, respond, refer, and then reflect. Okay. So when you're delivering this training on your campus, what would be helpful is to first direct people to engage with the content on the site itself, take some of the e-learning courses, actually do some of those exercises before having an in-person or a live session. Well, I guess now we can't really have in-person sessions anymore, but having some sort of live session over Zoom where you can then take them through this kind of training. This dedicated training is different from the content that's on the site in the sense that it's not conflicting content, it's not different content, but it is complementary, because what goes on in the kind of the e-learning part of the site is that it's very self-directed, and you do get to dive into a lot of the concepts more deeply. But the benefit of then following up with this live session is then you can do different kinds of discussion groups, exercises. You can talk about some of the FAQs that people have on campus. Okay. So before diving into those 4 R's, we find that it's helpful here first to bring everybody to have a similar understanding of how do we understand mental health and what is mental health. Just gonna do like a quick check-in with people here on the workshop. Is this a model, a mental health model that most people are familiar with? This mental health continuum? You can type yes, no in the chat. Because if most people are familiar with this, then I'm not going to spend too much time here. Okay, lots of yeses. You all know your stuff. But so I'll just very briefly highlight then. So this is the model that we are working with on the site and with most of the content. It's the idea that the mental health is different from mental illness, and that these things exist upon a dual continuum. So while of course all of you here are very knowledgeable and you've encountered this model before, when you're delivering the training on campus, whether it's with staff, student leaders, etc., I find that it's helpful to spend a little bit more time here to bring everyone to a shared understanding of how we look at mental health. Okay. Any questions here? Okay, I'm going to move on for now. Okay, so with that, we're going to dive into the first concept, which is recognize. And we've given, in the next couple of slides, we're going to go into a couple of different indicators or signs that a student might be experiencing some kind of struggle or difficulty. And these are broken down into physical, academic, behavioral, safety, and emergency indicators. And here it would be probably important to stress that any one single indicator is like, it's not a checklist whereby you're like, oh, student is doing poor academically, that means I should send them counseling. So that's not what we're trying to achieve here, but this is more of kind of different indicators that you can take into holistically as a cluster to see whether or not you should engage with the student to ask them, hey, are you doing okay? So some examples of physical indicators could be change or deterioration in physical appearance or personal hygiene, changes in weight, statements about changes in appetite or sleep, etc. And there's a lot more of these examples of indicators on the site in the e-learning course, which is why I again encourage people to tell your staff to take that as well. And it's important to note that the list being provided, whether it's here or on the site, is not exhaustive. So one activity that you can do while you're running this workshop with your staff is kind of ask people what they think physical indicators could be. And because there's going to be a lot of examples there. And next we have academic indicators, and these are usually most helpful for teaching staff, faculty, teaching assistants, etc., because this is what they're going to be seeing the most instead of some of the other indicators usually. And also during this time where most of our classes are going to be online instead of in person, some of those physical indicators might not be clear at all because there's not much that you can tell sometimes just from seeing someone on the screen. So some of these academic indicators instead could be more helpful. Sorry, I'm seeing a question on the chat. Yes, the recording will be provided and the facilitator's guide is on the More Feet on the Ground site itself. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to show people again how to download the slides in case you've missed it. Okay, so examples of academic indicators here could be missed assignments, especially multiple missed assignments, missed exams, repeated absences from class, and deterioration in quality or quantity of work. Here are some behavioral indicators. It could be angry or hostile outbursts, yelling, aggressive comments, and difficulty controlling emotions. Safety indicators, and usually these will be kind of indicators that you want to pay a little bit more attention to, would be such as written or oral statements that mention despair, suicide, death, expressions of desire to injure or kill someone else. So usually what we say that with all the other indicators, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to sit down and talk to the student, but with the safety indicators in particular, we would encourage that even if it's one single safety indicator, we would encourage staff to then, this would be a good time to reach out to the student because it indicates a need to take action or to support the student in some way. Emergency indicators is kind of like an escalation in some ways of some of the safety indicators, in which sometimes even the situation might feel threatening or dangerous to the staff person who is responding to that itself. So ultimately, though, when we look at all the different kinds of indicators, physical, behavioral, etc., they're all about observing a change in a student. So one of the kind of common questions that we get here is usually that if you have a large class, say we're talking about 100 students and above, you don't necessarily have the capacity, or you aren't necessarily familiar enough with each and every single one of your students to be able to observe a change there, because it doesn't necessarily imply that there is some sort of baseline observation that you can then use to compare that, oh, the student is now, behaving differently, acting differently, etc. Which is why we include things like academic indicators, which are in a lot of ways easier to compare and easier to take note of. Okay. And then now we're going to go into the second concept, which is respond. But before I start on that, do we have any questions about the recognize portion of the content? And again, feel free to ask. I'm going through the training, because kind of just ask questions whenever. I'm keeping a little chat window open there, so that I will see questions when they pop up. Okay. So now that we've talked about recognizing and noticing some of the signs that a student might need further support, we're going to talk about how do we then respond to the student. And there's really two main ways that this might happen. So if you have a relationship with the student, you may then feel comfortable beginning a conversation. But if you don't know the student, for example, in that situation, when I talk about a class full of 100 people, maybe you prefer to directly just link them to your counseling or wellness department. It really does depend on the staff person's level of experience, kind of their own comfort, and kind of the ability to give time to the situation. Oh, I'm just seeing a question pop up there. Any tips for recognizing factors virtually? Yes, so there was a really good kind of resource that came out about a month and a half ago, which was kind of talking about faculty and how to facilitate discussions, how to talk about content in our now new virtual world. And I think that some of the things from the resource also talk about how do you tell when a student is struggling to engage with their classmates, struggling to engage them with you. So I'm happy to send that out to people. I'll look that up, so I'm happy to send that up in a follow-up email to people. Okay. So when you're responding, or rather in your role as you're teaching people how to respond, I think that it's important here to kind of give people some agency, in that it's up to them to decide how exactly they want to go about responding. We can provide kind of guidelines and best practices for about, here's how you set the stage, here are some things you can think about while you're talking with a student. But I think that it's good here to emphasize that we're not expecting them to suddenly become counselors. Although on the flip side of that, which is something that has come up in some of the other workshops that I've run, is that we're now seeing a phenomena, though, where a lot of faculty feel very uncomfortable because of, and it could be a multiple of factors, could be, lack of experience. It could be just general fears of professional boundaries and such. But a number of faculty do feel more uncomfortable with the respond portion of this exercise. So what's happening is that they're kind of just directly channeling students to counseling. Just, oh, you're struggling in class, go to counseling. Oh, it seems like you've been missing a couple of classes, go to counseling. And that's definitely something that we want to try to address here by kind of giving people the tools that they need in order to respond. Okay. So I want to do a quick check-in here to see how people are doing. Am I moving too fast? Am I moving too slow? Am I covering too much? Feel free to just let me know. And also, is this topic what you were expecting? Because I know that I'm not really touching on the actual content and morphing on the ground stuff, but focusing more on things that you can do as a facilitator. Awesome. Looks like people are okay. All right. So moving on more into the respond portion. So we've kind of chosen to break down the respond portion a little bit more, especially because it's so kind of complicated, but I think that there's just more parts to it, in that it takes some time for people to get more comfortable with responding. So the first one is we set the stage. And I'm going to go through all of these steps in just a little bit. In a second, you're going to ask permission, start the conversation, and then finally, you're going to think about how do you maintain professional boundaries, and also think about safety risks. One of the things that we like to kind of pause here and say is that what is good listening? And here it would be interesting to kind of have a discussion with the staff that you're training, and then what do people think being a good listener, and what do people think active listening is like? You can kind of just spend a little bit of time here talking about what that is, and you can give examples like, good listening would mean allowing people to tell their story, allowing silences in the conversation, etc. Another good exercise that you can do here is the iceberg exercise, and some of you may be kind of familiar with this concept. So the idea behind the iceberg exercise and what you can do is you can just draw an iceberg out on whiteboard or whatever kind of sketch pad that you have. And so there's a little bit of the iceberg that's above the water, but most of the iceberg is below the water. And when we talk about recognizing and responding to a student, and this iceberg exercise kind of illustrates why it's so important to take the time to respond to a student instead of just channeling them to counseling, because what we recognize in these academic indicators, behavioral indicators, physical indicators are just very much on the surface. These are things that you're observing as staff, as faculty, but until you talk to the student, you have absolutely no idea what is going on underneath the surface. Because things that you're observing on the surface, such as fatigue, irritability, missed classes, there could be various reasons for why that is happening. And that's why it's so important to have that response step in order to do a little bit of that kind of detective work in some ways to see what kinds of support your student needs. Because a number of things could be driving these indicators, such as it could be health issues, it could be financial issues, maybe it's a toxic work or school environment, burnout. So mental health challenges are only one of the many things that could be driving some of these indicators, so to speak. So by kind of channeling students to counseling straight away, you're bypassing the step. And maybe what the student needs is not necessarily a connection to the counseling department. Maybe what they need actually is a connection to financial support at the institution, or perhaps like kind of childcare support if they have children that they're taking care of. And that's why I think this exercise is useful for when you're running the workshop, to be able to get people to think about what are the things that you're going to be observing on the surface, and what could be the various things that are going on underneath that don't necessarily mean it's a mental health challenge and this person then needs to go for counseling, so to speak. Okay. So now we're going to go into the first part of Respond, which is setting the stage. So some examples of setting the stage are like trying to find a nice environment or kind of a quiet environment. This, obviously applies a little bit more to in-person setting the stage. Such as like being aware of your own body language and etc. So now that we've transitioned to mostly online, that could be things like maybe if needed, whether that's via email, whether that is scheduling some time for student to have like a Zoom call or something like that, so that it's kind of private and is not part of the larger class, so that you're not calling out students in a class of 100 people saying that, hey, I notice you're sleeping, are you okay? Because that's not going to be very helpful. Some other things to consider here, especially when we're talking about setting a positive tone and being aware of body language. So here, because it's an online environment, we want to think more about things like voice modulation. When you're talking to a student, when you're checking in with them, if it's over video, what can you see on your face? What does your voice sound like? Does it come from a place where you're expressing that you're caring? Because sometimes students, when it's faculty or staff reaching out to them saying, are you okay? There's a lot of fear with students that, does this mean I'm in trouble? They're afraid of the stigma, and they might also be afraid that, does this mean that people are going to, basically they're afraid that there might be repercussions to talking about the issues that they're facing. So when you're setting the stage for the conversation and setting that positive tone, etc., having it come from a place where you're expressing the care for the student rather than you're in trouble now is very helpful. Okay. The second one, and this is very important, it's ask permission. So we need to respect students' privacy and sense of confidentiality. So we're going to create a space where students feels like it's safe to share or not share, because this might not be a time when a student feels comfortable to share, but you're just starting to opening that dialogue and letting them know that, hey, I'm here if you need me, so that in the future they can then loop back to you and say, actually, here's this thing that I'd like to talk about. But at the end of the day, it is the student's choice. They might not feel like sharing at that particular time, but they may come back at a different time to talk. So asking permission puts the ball in their court, so to speak, and also gives them the agency of whether or not this is something that they want to address right now. So when you ask permission, you can start a conversation just saying, I'm concerned about I'm concerned about this behavior, or I'm concerned about you've been missing your classes, so I wonder if we could talk about it. And then it's up to the student to decide if this is something that they want to talk about or not. So when it comes to starting a conversation, again, expressing the concern and caring here is very helpful. And then you can talk about the specific indicators that you've observed, which is what is leading you to have this conversation. You can be like, I've noticed lately that you've missed some assignments. Are you doing okay? Is there anything that you'd like support with, etc. Also helpful to be asking open-ended questions, because that allows the student to elaborate a little bit more on how they're doing and if anything is going on with their lives. And other helpful things here while you're running your workshop is to give them examples of how you prompt student to talk more. You can say, tell me more about that, or how do you indicate that you're empathizing with student, and some of those kind of like classic like active listening things that a lot of you will probably be more familiar with. So a helpful exercise here is to do like some quick role plays with your participants. One to kind of put people into groups of two, and one person is going to be the student and the other person is going to be the staff or faculty, etc. And you're just going to simply start a conversation by saying, how are you? And then you go from there. And that lets people kind of put those concepts into action a little bit. Okay. And so while we're talking about responding, we also want to talk about how do we maintain some of these professional boundaries, which is something that is a concern for it could be a concern for a number of people. We do like to emphasize here again that your role is not to counsel, and it's really just to serve as the bridge between the student and whatever endpoint resources that they need. So the goal here in the respond portion is to just spend some time with that iceberg and to see what are the issues beneath the surface. You don't necessarily have to engage too much of those issues. No one is expecting you to suddenly solve their financial issues, their mental health challenges. Absolutely none of that. But the idea here is just to be able to understand what a student needs so that you can then channel them towards the appropriate resources. And of course, things like respecting confidentiality, but at the same time, avoiding making those kind of sweeping promises about confidentiality. So here we will kind of advise people here to not make a promise about confidentiality, but you can say a statement something around respecting privacy instead of confidentiality, because as we all know, there are conditions in which staff or faculty might be required to break that confidentiality, especially if a student has expressed the desire to harm themselves or others. So what they can instead reassure the student of, though, is that this conversation will be kept private, and they're not going to disclose this they're not going to be disclosing this to their classmates or other faculty, etc. Important to kind of let people know in the workshop as well is that students do not need to disclose a diagnosis in order to receive an academic accommodation. So of course, this is easier when the student's already registered with accessibility services. But if they're asking for, any kinds of academic accommodations, just making sure that faculty are aware that students don't have to disclose a diagnosis in order to receive those accommodations. So sometimes students may share more information than is necessary. They might, for example, provide details about their diagnosis, details about their symptoms, but faculty don't need that information, so you don't need to follow up with further questions. Okay, I'm seeing some question here. Who should we contact about making sure our services are up to date on the Morphine on the Ground website? So we actually pull our list of services from Connex Ontario. I'm happy to connect you with our point person from, wait, actually, is it Connex? Yes, it is Connex. I'm happy to connect you with kind of our point person for that to make sure those are up to date, because yeah, that's a really good point. On the Morphine on the Ground website, we have a kind of a database of services for every campus, and you can, if you're curious, you can go and check it out. But yes, if yours are out of date, then connect with me and I will kind of put you in touch with the person at Connex who updates those services. Okay. All right, and so I'm trying to figure out how to shrink my chat box. Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about here in that respond portion is students who have expressed, the desire to commit suicide, and if the student is at imminent risk. So this is something that you might want to address during your workshop as well. And for those of you who have taken things like Safe Talk as well, you can integrate some of those concepts into your workshop while you're delivering it. Something that we usually like to address here is the fear that by asking a student about their intention, or by kind of wanting clarification around whether the student is talking about suicide, a lot of people are afraid that this will then lead them to consider suicide even more, contemplate suicide even more, and that is not true, because the question is not going to put ideas in the student's head to increase the likelihood that they're going to make an attempt. So what some of the things that you can say here is that asking the student, what do you need to get back into a healthy path, asking the students what they think would help, and then definitely suggest resources, referrals to the appropriate resources on campus. Ultimately, though, unless the student is suicidal or maybe a danger to others, the ultimate decision to access resources belongs to the student. So if when you're offering referral information, the student says, I'll think about it, you can let them do it. What you can do then is let the student know that you're interested in hearing how they're doing. So you're kind of letting them close the loop, letting them know that you're here if they still want to check in. And if needed, you can speak to someone in your university or college, whether it's the academic advising office, etc., about the conversation that you had. You don't necessarily need to reveal the student's name, unless, again, the student is at high risk for suicide or a danger to others. So here we usually put in another exercise that you can do with your group, and you have a couple of options here. One is the listening exercise that some of you may be familiar with. It's where groups break out into pairs, and one person is just going to talk for a full minute, or it could be up to 3 minutes, and the other person is just going to listen without saying anything. And the goal of this exercise is to kind of practice what listening without interruption would be like, and also to be able to illustrate to people how it feels to be able to share your story without someone interrupting. The other exercise that you can do is the starting that conversation exercise, which is similar to what we did before. But the difference here is that you can, and here is some of the handouts that we have on the website. You can give different roles to people. You can say that, okay, what would it be like to respond if, you know, you were a student and this is your scenario. You can give them different roles to play, such as, okay, this is your role. You are a student advisor. It is 5 o'clock in the afternoon and the student suddenly rushes into your office. You have to run off and pick up your daughter from school. And these are the kind of the different kind of scenarios that we've included in the handout on the site. Okay. So I want to take some time here to just pause again a little bit to see if there are any questions about the content before we move into the referral portion. Okay, everything's clear. Awesome, I'm such a great presenter. Just kidding. Okay, we're gonna move to the referral section then. Okay, so here, what we have here is kind of just some tips for people taking the workshop, which is that, you know, it's good to explain the limitations of your knowledge. So whether this is faculty or staff person, tell them it's okay to say that they don't have all the answers. However, it is helpful here, and in the next slide, actually, you're going to see we left a blank space for you to be able to fill in the own information from your campus about the common, because some campuses, they have common referral pathways, they have like a service navigation sort of flow chart where if a student is looking for this, then go here. If a student's looking for that, then go here. Maybe your institution has that, maybe they don't. But in the next slide, what would be helpful is there's to give some of the common resources on campus so that the people taking your workshop have a sense of what is out there that they can refer students to. So here, when we're referring students to internal or actually external services, providing the name and office location of the referral resource, of course, now that everything's online, name, phone number, website, just some way that they can contact that particular resource. And as much as possible, try to normalize the need to ask for help. So when it's like, oftentimes a student might say that, you know, I feel so silly for this, like, I'm struggling and I have no idea why I'm struggling. You must think I'm like being really silly. Here it's helpful to try and just normalize that, no, you know, it's not silly at all. You know, we're here to support you and we're gonna try and help you get the support that you need. So kind of conveying that it's okay to not be okay. And of course, finally, realize that the offer of assistance might be rejected, whether it's temporarily or even further down the line, because it's up to that student again to decide whether or not they're going to use that resource. So frequently asked questions that we have during this section is that sometimes we have faculty or staff saying, okay, so if my offer of assistance is going to be rejected, what happens when, you know, this is the 10th time that it's the same student coming to me, and it's, you know, I'm listening to their struggles. I'm trying to be as empathetic and as present as I can, but this is like the 10th or 11th time that they're coming to me with the same issue, and I don't have the resources, and I've referred them to resources, but I don't know what to do anymore because I've tried my best. So here I think it's important to kind of open up that dialogue to, you know, if faculty or staff are feeling that, you know, they've done their best and they're still facing this problem whereby students are not taking up that offer of assistance, it's okay to set some of those personal and or professional boundaries. If someone has reached, so to speak, a point by which they don't feel that they're capable of continuing this conversation with the student, it's okay to say no. because of course we want to make sure that people are trained and are comfortable with providing resources and responding to students, but we're not expecting people to sort of get to the point of burnout in doing that as well. At some point, if your offer of assistance is going to be rejected again and again, it's also okay to say no, and we just want to make sure people are kind of comfortable knowing that you can do as much as you want, and at the end of the day, it's up to the student to take action on their own. Okay, any questions about that? Usually it's quite a hot topic. And what's helpful here is you can also kind of talk about resources that faculty or staff have access to, like maybe there's a point person on campus that faculty can talk to when they experience a scenario like that. I know that some campuses have like debriefing groups and so on and so forth. Does this help with faculty burnout prevention? Yes, it does. So especially that last little bit where we're telling people it's okay to say no. Because a lot of times, there's different kinds of faculty, like and you're gonna get some faculty that are extremely passionate about helping their students, and they wanna go above and beyond, and they're gonna find that if they're offering assistance again and again, and if every single time they're sitting with the student, they're going through, they're recognize, respond, refer, but the student is coming back again week after week, they're going to start experiencing that level of compassion fatigue and burnout. So I think it's important definitely to have that discussion about, at what point is it okay to say no, and really this is just about kind of reflecting on our own kind of boundaries and where does that lie. And we're going to actually go into that in the last part of the presentation as well when we talk about the reflect portion. So hold tight. Okay. So yes, as I mentioned earlier, this is the kind of blank slide that we have for you that you can add in the different resources that you have on your campus, the different services. And here's like if you're not sure, perhaps you can refer to what we have listed on the Morphine on Ground side, although as someone pointed out, some of them may be a little bit out of date if Connex hasn't been updating them. But that's a starting place, and you can put some of the most commonly accessed resources here, or if you have some kind of like triaging system, that's also helpful to put the system navigation chart, that can all go here. So I know I sound like a broken record because I keep talking about this, the scenario in which a student does not want help or does not want help in that moment. And the reason that we keep coming back to this is because there's usually a lot of questions about this, like, the whole, well, what can I do? Because sometimes staff and faculty can feel helpless in a situation where they're trying their best, but a student may not want to take up this offer of assistance or referral at this point. So we just like to kind of like validate their experiences of this, in that, yeah, this is definitely going to not definitely, but there's a probability that this might happen. Sometimes you might have students that will not want to be referred straight off, and it's not you, it's not about you, it's not because you didn't do a good job of referring people, but sometimes they might take some time, and really all you can do is keep those lines of communication open as and when you can. So just acknowledging their choice and reinforcing the positive aspects of help could be helpful. Okay. All right. I have another question here. How do you balance, whoop, I can't pull up my questions. How do you balance the students' struggles with academic expectations? So could you clarify that? Balance the students' struggles with, with offering support, is that? Yes, okay. So this is a tricky one, I think, because sometimes, and I have heard, like, I've gotten some feedback from people taking the workshop that there are some situations in which students will be kind of struggling to meet academic expectations, and this could be for a variety of reasons, and sometimes it could be because of mental health challenges. So really, there's no kind of black and white to what someone can do in a situation. Of course, if you have those, students need to be able to kind of adhere to their academic obligations in order to graduate. Like that's not something that they have a lot of leeway on. Like it's you either pass or fail the course sometimes, and you need that course to graduate. So at a certain point, if students are, they're constantly missing work, even after you've had like these conversations and you've directed them to the appropriate resources, to be kind of perfectly blunt, is that the student will fail the course, because these are kind of the things that you need in order to pass the course, and you've submitted 0 assignments up until the last day of the course. There's kind of no way that we can work around that, really. The only thing we can do is kind of have a conversation with the student and set those expectations that, I know that you're struggling, and here are the resources that can help you, academic advising resources, maybe if it's, if it is a mental health challenge, mental health resources, etc. But set those kind of be clear to the student that if I'm here to support you and these are the supports you can have, however, because of missed assignments or not coming to examinations and stuff, you might end up failing the course, and this is what is going to happen. And of course, if they have the need for academic accommodations, making sure that they know where to get that. But yes, at some point, it is going to be kind of between a rock and a hard place that the student is going to fail the course if they keep missing work. So yeah, I think that we can kind of set that up as much as possible. But I think being clear with the student that these are kind of these are the consequences, unfortunately, of not submitting the necessary academic work, because you can't pass a course without doing that kind of work. Okay. All right. So some final key messages that you can give people in this respond portion. So we tell people, like staff and faculty, that one of the things that you want students to know is that getting support is normal, and getting support as early as possible is going to be helpful for them, because it's much easier, so to speak, to help someone who is not in imminent crisis, because there's much more resources that are going to be helpful to them, versus someone who is kind of further down the line, and they're experiencing a crisis, and they might need very specific supports at that point. And also that it's okay to not know about every single service on your campus. Oftentimes campuses, especially the larger campuses, they're like small cities, and there's no standardization across different campuses as well. So some campuses have like health and wellness departments, some campuses call it student services department. So it's all very different, and it's okay to not know every single service that a campus has, especially when there's so much innovative work being done and there's kind of smaller programs popping up all the time. Okay, so here it would be good to take a break with your group and do like a little group activity. You can use one of the case studies that we've included here, and I'm going to show you that on the next slide, and ask them to kind of discuss what they would do in that situation. So I would say no more than 10 to 15 minutes for this activity if you want to run it. Okay, so here are some of these scenarios. And we've got a couple of different scenarios here, such as, if a student comes into your office hours crying, and you have another student coming in 10 minutes, and you have to pick up your child from daycare, what would you do? And so break them up into small groups, maybe about like 3 or 4 people per group, and then they can choose to discuss the scenarios, or they can role play if they prefer. But then after that, you're going to come back into a group to share kind of what would be the appropriate approach here. I see I have another question in the chat. Guidance on indicators that can be seen within a virtual environment that student is struggling. Yes, so as I mentioned earlier, there is a document that was released. I can't remember which university. I want to say Ottawa, but I am not 100% sure. And it was a kind of a guidebook for faculty on how to support students in online environments. So I think I've kind of briefly skimmed through the book before, and I would be, it's all online, it's all free. I'm happy to send out that resource to people in the follow-up email, because I think that, if I remember correctly, that particular resource goes into things like, things that you can see in an online environment. It looks like, sorry, I have another question here. It looks like, according to the guide, that there are supposed to be different scenarios for groups of 4 to 3, and the ones you're reading currently are meant for separate activity of participants in groups of 2 to 3. 45. Whoops. Oh, yes, I just realized that the guide says 2 different things. Number of people doesn't really matter as long as it's small groups, really. The number is kind of like arbitrary, because it really depends on how many people you have in your workshop. The reasons why you might want a bigger group rather than a smaller group is if you have kind of a lot of people in your workshop, and it's just not feasible to do breakout rooms for, especially if you're doing it over Zoom, it's not feasible to have like so many breakout rooms for different people. Okay, so now we are going into the last section, which is reflect. So this is what happens after someone, you've recognized, you respond, you refer the student off to services, and now it's time to kind of just reflect on what has happened. So here we like to kind of talk about, have like a check-in with, the staff that you're doing the training with, like, how are people feeling so far? Like, is this a lot? And it can be a lot sometimes. And so we'll talk about, after talking to a student who is in distress, it can be important to kind of document some of those key points. And, without having it be too much personal information, that documentation is mostly for yourself, so that you kind of have some point of referral for yourself to come back to in case a student wants to loop back to you again in the future. You do want to ensure the privacy of the students, so of course, that's kind of self-explanatory. And of course, taking a moment to reflect on your own emotional state, kind of assessing your own need to engage in wellness activities. And here you can, while you're running the workshop, you can put in some resources for staff, like connections to the EAP program, or whatever on-campus, off-campus resources that you have for staff. And finally, consultation and debriefing as needed. So depending on, is this faculty, or is this some kind of staff person or student leader? Definitely, we encourage people to debrief with another person, depending on kind of what the protocols are for that particular department, because it does vary. I know that at one of the campuses, they kind of have a bi-weekly get-together with everyone in the department to talk about kind of if anyone has had, like, some particularly challenging cases and anyone needs to debrief. And you can definitely do this in a way that still maintains privacy. So here we do like to talk a little bit about kind of secondary traumatic stress and compassion fatigue, so that, we're letting people know that it's normal to kind of be feeling a range of things after they interact with a student, and, that particular interaction had some more traumatic, so to speak, topics. So it's really, really important to take care of your own well-being after offering support to someone else. And practicing self-care in whatever way that makes sense for you. And take some time to do kind of one of these things, whether it's debriefing with a friend, reflecting on the situation, and making sure that the people who are taking your workshop know what kind of resources that they have, so that they're not lost after after responding and referring the student somewhere else. Because sometimes, especially if it's a particularly difficult conversation, they're going to want to be able to debrief with someone. You can also talk about, what does so the way that this entire workshop is structured is that you can put in pieces that you want, you can take out pieces that you don't want, and as long as you're maintaining kind of the general concept of like the 4: recognize, respond, reflect, refer, we're happy for you to change this up however you want. So if your department or kind of on your campus, you have specific kind of like wellness presentations that you want to put in here, this would be a great place to put that in. But otherwise, we spent some time here briefly talking about what does self-care mean to people. Does it mean like, taking care of your body, taking care of your work-life balance, eating well? And here you can also ask people for further examples for, what does everyone do to take care of themselves? Because everyone's going to interpret self-care a little bit differently. Okay. And actually, I don't know why this slide is here. It should have been a lot earlier. My apologies. So this is for off-campus. Where could students go to for help? Like, let's say they don't want to use on-campus resources. 2 of the big ones are Good to Talk, which I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with. And of course, Connex Ontario. Those are 2 kind of off-campuses, free to use services that students have access to. Another one is actually Bounce Back. So that is across Ontario. It's like free telephone-based mental health support, although I believe a person does need to be referred by their physician, but it is again free for everyone. Okay, and we're coming to almost the end of the presentation. We're going to do a short plug for us in ways that we can support your learning. Obviously, the More Feet on the Ground is just one of the many different kind of things that we do. So if you want to supplement that learning with like webinars, conferences, like so much stuff, please go to our website at More Feet on the Ground. campusmentalhealth.ca. We have 2 sites. One is the dedicated More Feet on the Ground site, and one is our campus mental health site. I see a question. Where are the various resources located on the website? Yes, so I will do that in a little bit. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to show you how to download the slides and also the handouts. Okay. So, and here, finally, at the end of your session, when you've run your workshop, you want to close it off with talking about, what have you learned today? Is there anything that you're going to stop doing, start doing, continuing to do as a result of the training? And how is this going to apply to your day-to-day work? So just having that discussion with your workshop participants will be really helpful. And to help with that, we actually have a planning worksheet that's on the side. Let me quickly pull that out. Oops. Yeah. So this is one of the resources that we have with the facilitator's guide. So you can give that out to participants of your workshop to just help them to think about, what are their next steps after taking this training. Okay. So that's all available on our site. Oops. And then moving forward, one of the things that you can do is also kind of create your own plan, or ask the participants in your workshop to kind of think about, after you leave here today, what are the things that you're going to do? Oh, I had a question to show that again. Yes, of course. So here you go. It's a planning worksheet. And yeah, I'm gonna give people the link to be able to download this later. So it's not, don't worry, I'm not gonna run away with this. Okay, yes, I will show everyone how to get it and also provide the direct link. Okay, and that is it. So now I'm gonna take you back to the website again to show you how to get all of this. Give me 2 seconds. I need to stop the share and start the share again. Okay. So you're going to go to morphineontheground.ca. That will take you to the main Morphine on the Ground site. And you're going to scroll to the bottom of the page, right at the bottom, under Facilitator's Guide. You click this. And that's where we have the presentation slides, the group practice scenarios that I mentioned earlier, and also the planning worksheet. Okay. And so just to close off, I hope that was useful for everyone. And I'm now happy to answer any questions that weren't already covered or weren't already asked. So while I'm waiting for that, if there are any questions. So there's a couple of options for you if you want to deliver this training on your campus. One of the ways that I've mentioned is, letting people do the e-learning part of the course by themselves, and then having a follow-up session later on in which you deliver the workshop like this. The other option that you can have is, and actually this is one that I can't remember whether it was Boreal who uses that, or not entirely sure, but they basically have they set aside a monthly time to have kind of staff, faculty, whoever wants to drop in to ask questions about this training. So you don't have to deliver this entire workshop, but of course, a lot of the things covered in this workshop will be helpful because of those frequently asked questions. I see a question. Is there a training for students on mental health? So do you mean a training that students can take? If so, no. Students are welcome to take the Morphine on the Ground course as well, because some of the concepts like, recognize, respond, refer, students can refer other students as well. And on the e-learning part of the course, we do go a little bit more into, the different kind of mental health concepts and basic mental health literacy. This particular workshop, like the PowerPoint workshop, is more focused on the 4 R's, but the website is more focused on kind of like mental health literacy. So they can take that as well. Another question, do you have best recommendations for delivering the group activities in an online format? I think that depends on what platform you're using, but if you're using Zoom, what I would recommend for the kind of like, especially this, the group activity near the end where you're breaking people up into groups of like 3 or 4, then you can use the breakout room function on Zoom to be able to split people off into their own individual rooms for about like 10-15 minutes, and then they can come back to the larger group to share. It is definitely a little bit more tricky online than it would have been in person, but it's definitely doable. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. And for the practice, I should just skip. Yeah, so and really this applies to any of the things in the entire deck. We're more than happy for you to adapt it to your campus, adapt it to your audience, because maybe if you're facilitating with a bunch of student leaders, it might be quite different from facilitating it with some faculty members. So whatever makes sense for your audience is kind of just the basic backbone for you, and we're happy for you to just take it away. So yeah, facilitate it in kind of whatever way that makes sense. I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything. Other than that, more than happy for you to connect with me if you have any questions or anything. My email is right at the end. Let me share my screen again. It's png@campusmentalhealth.ca, but why is my screen not sharing? Okay, I hope you can see my screen, but yes, so my name is Perlin. Wow, I completely forgot to introduce myself at the start. I just realized. My name is Perlin. Hi, nice to meet you after an hour and 10 minutes. And that's my email, png@campusmentalhealth.ca. So please shoot me an email if you have any questions. And I will send out a link to the recording of this workshop, as well as that other kind of guide for faculty that I mentioned earlier, because that's not a resource that we produce as an external resource, but I can just link it in the follow-up email that's probably going to go out tomorrow or something. All right. And let me see if anyone has any more questions. If there are no more questions, I'm really glad you were able to join me today, and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.